In today's episode of Old Money Mansions, we investigate the curious case of England's grand country estates. These once lavish domiciles, brimming with invaluable art and ornate fixtures of gold, were shockingly reduced to rubble between the years 1900 and 1970. Therefore, the question looms: why did London, that paragon of history and culture, sanction the demolition of its own luxurious landmarks? Indeed, it seems as if our capital, in a calculated act, wished to distance itself from these aging monuments of a past that no longer resonated with the evolving societal milieu. In this video, we'll explore a narrative rich with elements of opulence, social transformation, and a pinch of good old-fashioned British theatrics. With that all said, let us begin and explain why London destroyed its most opulent country houses. In the late Victorian and Edwardian periods, stretching from the waning years of the 19th century into the dawn of the 20th, Great Britain was awash in a surge of prosperity unprecedented in its history. Dubbed by some as the Age of Opulence, the nation's coffers swelled, owing largely to the blessings and burdens of the Industrial Revolution. In this sea of prosperity, two distinct yet intertwined social strata emerged. Industrial magnates and financiers amalgamated with the ancient lineage of landed aristocrats. With their deep pockets, they erected homes of immense grandeur and architectural dignity, country houses that became the lodestars of society, both old and new. Therefore, as early as the 1800s, a constellation of monumental homes dotted the English countryside: Chatsworth House, Blenheim Palace, Castle Howard, each a veritable palace unto itself. With their sprawling rooms that could fill a small village and acres upon acres of sculpted gardens, these residences were microcosms of empire, each governed by its own retinue of servants, stewards, and caretakers. Their walls were bedecked with masterpieces of European art, Renaissance paintings, and Baroque sculptures that could rival the holdings of great museums. Now, in this sanctum of sophistication, the role of the country house extended beyond mere residence. Indeed, they functioned as the pulsing hearts of England's social and political circulatory system. They were the spaces where the wine flowed and ideas were exchanged, where alliances were made and deals brokered. Emerging from this landscape was Chesterfield House, commissioned by the 4th Earl of Chesterfield, a distinguished statesman and literary figure in the waning years of the 19th century. Conceived in the grand tradition of Palladian architecture, the house boasted a majestic portico and interiors bathed in unadulterated elegance. Its art holdings were nothing short of legendary, with luminous canvases by Titian, Rubens, and Van Dyck illuminating its walls. Add to this a library of 10,000 books, and one can easily appreciate its cultural potency. Then, across the turn of the century, in the early 1900s, a new titan joined this pantheon of architectural marvels: Belvedere House. A triumph of American wealth and ambition, its constructor was none other than William Waldorf Astor. The home was a symphony in neoclassicism, crowned with a grand dome and ringed with Corinthian columns. Indeed, it was a palace of culture and pleasure, featuring lavish ballrooms, a scholars' library, and a billiard room where statesmen and tycoons could engage in a different sort of diplomacy. And the walls were adorned with the grandiloquent strokes of Rembrandt, the gentle landscapes of Gainsborough, and the piercing portraits of Sargent. Thus, both Chesterfield and Belvedere houses served as radiant social nexuses in the heart of London. From philanthropic galas to star-studded soirees, they were the stages upon which the drama of an epoch played out, a drama of affluence, power, and ever-shifting societal landscapes. But the early decades of the 20th century signalled an epochal shift for Britain's storied country houses. The champagne bubbles of Edwardian prosperity burst abruptly with the onset of World War I, leaving in its wake a sobering reality that cut across class lines. Previously the epicenters of social grace and unbridled affluence, these homes became poignant symbols of a fading world. The tragic cost of the Great War, counted not just in lives lost, but in the economic drain it wrought, pulled the British aristocracy back from its zenith. Therefore, not only did the war decimate a generation of young men from noble families, it also instigated a transformation in the societal ethos. Egalitarianism became more than a rhetorical ideal. The collective hardship of war laid bare the vulnerability of the upper crust, sparking new debates on social justice and class structures. For instance, Wimbledon Manor House, originally erected by the Earl of Spencer in the early 19th century, bore witness to these tides of change. The dwelling had seen the souls of illustrious feet, from Queen Victoria to Winston Churchill, but by 1919 the house became a casualty of dwindling Spencer finances, forcing its sale. Poised for demolition to make way for a new housing estate, the edifice was salvaged by public sentiment. Then, Wimbledon Borough Council acquired it in 1922, converting it into a museum open to the wider public. Meanwhile, rising middle-class affluence coupled with the waning influence of the aristocracy further dampened the allure of these grand residences. Maintenance costs soared, the price of keeping these homes aglow with gaslights and warmed by roaring hearths proved untenable for many. Large domestic staffs, once a symbol of grandiosity, became a financial albatross. Belmont, in East Barnet, Hertfordshire, exemplified this broader trend. Designed by Robert Adam in 1774 for Sir William Chambers, Belmont was a masterstroke in Regency architecture. Boasting a stately facade balanced by a capacious portico and interiors adorned with elegant staircases and rooms of graceful proportions, it was once a standard bearer for British architectural prowess. Yet, by the end of the 19th century, Belmont metamorphosed into Heddon Court, a preparatory school for boys, which then closed its doors in 1933. You see, high costs of upkeep, paired with onerous taxes, rang the death knell for Belmont. Its sprawling spaces demanded excessive heating, its location commanded steep land taxes, and its once celebrated gardens devoured financial resources. Thus, the beautiful but impractical home eventually met the wrecking ball. Therefore, the early 20th century became the unforgiving crucible in which many of Britain's country houses were tried. Some emerged transformed, serving new societal functions, while others vanished into the annals of history, their stately rooms and lush gardens living on only in sepia-toned photographs and whispered lore. And the Second World War unfurled another chapter of devastation for Britain's venerable country estates. Swathes of these homes were requisitioned by military forces, converted into makeshift hospitals or training sites, or left mangled by bomb raids. Icons such as Castle Howard, Chatsworth House, and Blenheim Palace did not escape unscathed, facing bomb damage or incendiary fires that erased centuries of history in an instant. The exigencies of war further exacerbated the decline. Maintenance took a back seat as manpower and resources redirected toward the front lines. Empty estates turned into ghostly tableaux, grand gardens surrendered to entropy, becoming overgrown tangles of neglect. For example, 1952 saw the heartbreaking dismantling of Wimbledon Country House. A Georgian gem in Surrey, this iconic structure met demolition. Once a wartime school, it too crumbled under the weight of public decision and political expediency. You see, post-war Britain found itself under the governance of the 1945 Labour administration, a regime hell-bent on social change. Country estates, long considered bastions of traditionalism, were now targets. New laws aimed at facilitating urban renewal, coupled with stifling wealth taxes, left many families unable to sustain these homes. The political agenda, it seemed, was firmly tilted toward demolition and repurposing these lands for public utilities and housing. Therefore, the wrecking ball had started its work even earlier for some estates. Chesterfield House, empty and dilapidated, was reduced to rubble in the 1930s. In its place rose a block of flats, an homage in name only to its grand predecessor. Fast forward to 1965, and Belvedere House, a neoclassical marvel in London, met its end. It had functioned as a hotel during the war, but was no longer needed in a changing landscape. Public sentiment flared against its demolition, but the decision held firm. With this, the public conscience remained divided. On one hand, the sentiment ran strong for replacing these ostentatious symbols of the old world order. On the other, many argued for preserving these architectural and cultural treasures. The seesaw of public opinion has not settled, and the debate rages on: should these beacons of history and artistry be preserved, or do contemporary societal needs take precedence? Next, the 1970s and 1980s unfurled like a dark cloud over the landscape of Britain's historic country homes. During these turbulent decades, the hammers and chisels of demolition crews turned hundreds of architectural marvels into ruins. The 70s, specifically, were mired in economic woes, staggering inflation, skyrocketing unemployment, and unrelenting industrial strife. The financial crucible made upkeep of these sprawling estates an onerous endeavor. Families struggled with exorbitant heating and lighting costs, not to mention the small armies of servants essential for maintaining these grand domiciles. Moreover, austerity measures dealt a blow to heritage conservation. Funding cuts targeted organizations like the National Trust, hamstringing efforts to rescue these relics from the jaws of oblivion. The government's arsenal also included wealth taxes, financial instruments that rendered the maintenance of these expansive homes near impossible for families who were asset-rich but cash-poor. Thus, these grandiose structures became increasingly susceptible to decay and subsequent demolition. Amidst the gloom, a spark of preservation awareness ignited in 1974 with the destruction of the Country House exhibition at the Victoria and Albert Museum. The exhibit marked a seminal moment, engendering public discourse around the importance of safeguarding these cultural treasures. But the 1980s were no less challenging. London, an ever-expanding metropolis, devoured its surrounding countryside. Where once stood majestic manors, now rose condominiums and corporate parks. As the capital sprawled, heritage took a back seat to what was deemed progress or necessary expansion. The public at this time often perceived these regal homes as anachronisms, better raised than preserved to make room for housing projects and civic utilities. Government policies aided and abetted this perspective by simplifying the demolition process. And concurrent with these upheavals was the emergence of a burgeoning middle class and the waning of the old aristocracy. This societal shift diminished the demand for palatial rural estates. In this cauldron of socio-economic and political factors, Britain's country houses were caught in an existential struggle, their fates hanging precariously between the old world's grandeur and the new world's pragmatism. As the calendar pages turned to the 90s and early 2000s, Britain witnessed a resurgence of interest in safeguarding its cherished country houses, an effort that had quietly begun in the 70s. Three compelling factors fanned these embers into flame: a rekindled respect for architectural heritage, burgeoning environmental consciousness, and the blossoming of tourism as an economic linchpin. Founded during the 1990s, organizations such as the Country Houses Association and the Heritage Alliance became standard bearers of this reawakening. With calculated zeal, they campaigned to illuminate the precarious circumstances facing these grand homes and petitioned for government intervention in the form of heritage preservation. And London's halls of power heeded the call. Throughout the 90s, legislators rolled out a suite of financial incentives to woo the custodians of these properties into opening their doors to the public eye. Alongside these tax breaks, funds for restoration projects flowed from the coffers of the government, injecting new vitality into dilapidated estates. Luckily, such endeavors bore fruit, rescuing numerous stately homes from the jaws of bulldozers. Yet for every saved estate, others fell victim to the unforgiving march of modernity. Housing estates sprang up where manicured lawns had once stretched out. Office buildings replaced elegant salons. Shopping malls supplanted cobblestoned courtyards. Each new structure seemed a discordant note in an age-old symphony, clashing with the grandiosity of what had been lost. Nonetheless, the country houses that endured stand today as compelling markers of Britain's storied past and rich cultural history. Crowds of tourists disembark from every corner of the globe, eager to roam their opulent halls and verdant gardens. These homes have morphed into living museums, each one a narrative of historical epochs and social mores. While urban sprawl persists as a looming threat, swallowing up tracts of the countryside as cities extend their boundaries, heightened awareness about the value of these architectural gems is growing. And now we'd like to see you in the comments. Have you visited one of London's lovely country houses still intact? And what are your opinions on these structures? We look forward to your thoughts. And thanks again for joining us for another episode of Old Money Mansions.